Fine. So just first and foremost, the general introduction to the chapter that we've been delving in. This is the chapter called Mitzvot in the 13 Petalled Rose. Mitzvot, which is usually translated as good deeds, but as Rabbi Steinsaltz clarified, does not just mean good deeds, it means connection. Because when we do a mitzvah, we connect to God, the commander of those mitzvot. And by connecting to God, we thereby become divine. At the same time, make this world divine, draw down God's presence to the mitzvah that we are doing and to the item that we may be using for that mitzvah too. Whether it's food, like saying blessings, that was one of the examples, I believe, or whether it's Shabbat, which was the other big example, bring down the holiness of Shabbat and therefore the holiness of God to this world on the seventh day. Now, just to recap the very last subject that we've been speaking about, and that's Shabbat and holidays. It's interesting to note that God gave us days as Shabbat and holy days, like Sukkot, Passover, Shavuot, and so on, in which we come to, in a way, meet God. These are meeting days with God. And on Shabbat, we are told to pause everything that is worldly, to almost elevate ourselves beyond this world in order to meet God, to come to this meeting with God, in order to connect to God. And of course, it's not just the God out there, but it's also the God in you, the divine soul, and all that it desires, and give it an ability to express itself. And the same with holidays. Holidays are in Hebrew are called Mo'adim. Mo'adim in Hebrew, that word comes from the word Yi'ud or Leya'ed, which means to designate, because holidays are seen as designated times that God inserted in our calendar in order to have a meeting with us. And that's really the deeper idea of Shabbat and holidays. And every single one of them, of course, has its own energy, so to speak. So those are the very big and very general ideas, but I want to continue.
Can I ask you a question about
Sure.
holidays? You know, some like Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are much more significant than Hanukkah, you know, and as is Passover. And, you know, can you explain why some holidays are less important, but still holidays?
Right. So good question. I don't know if I would say that they're less important, but like we just said, every holidays it's different energy, right? And some energy is more intense than others. And on Yom Kippur, for example, the energy is the energy of atonement, where God comes and Lifnei Hashem titharu, as we say, in front of God, we will be cleansed. It's an energy of cleansing. So that energy, obviously, maybe is more intense, maybe more significant.
But aren't there certain holidays where you don't drive, you treat them as if they were Shabbat, whereas in other holidays like
Right.
Hanukkah, you can go to work and you can live your life as long, you know, I mean, that's more what I'm saying. Whereas, you know, there's certain 6 or 7 holidays where we're much more.
Right. But every holiday, again, because every holiday has its own energy, so the structure to support that energy is different. Okay. Not driving is part of the structure of enabling the energy to come in its full glory without reservations. So on Shabbat, if the energy is indeed to connect to our soul, and we have to rest, and the structure is a structure of rest, or a structure of, it's not just rest, but it's of pausing this world, so to speak. And therefore, we are told not to drive and so on, so that we can create the structure to best then receive the energy of the day. And so again, every holiday has its own energy, but I'm glad you brought this up, because we, in order to best celebrate the holidays, we of course have to connect not just to the structure of the holiday, which is important, but most importantly to the soul of the holiday, to the energy of the holiday. And that's what it's all about. Okay, thank you. Let's continue where we left off, like you just said, Gila, on page 119, the very top of the page here in the 13 Petalled Rose. Does anyone want to read? Anyone?
Okay, Rabbi, I guess.
Thank you, Gila. Thank you.
Okay.
Go for it.
The halacha, the formal structure defining the order of mitzvot, prescribes in great detail the many things one is forbidden to do on the Sabbath. All of them, however, are derived from the same basic idea that the Sabbath is the day when one ceases to be a creator in the domain of the outer world and turns inward toward holiness. This dual quality of the day in which one is not only to refrain from creativity, but also to complete creativity in spiritual terms, follows, of course, from this idea, so that tikkun, putting the world in order, even the correcting of one's own soul or healing its wounds, is not for the Sabbath. The Sabbath is to be made available for a summation of the things acquired during the week in an attempt to raise them spiritually and knowingly or unknowingly, to bring the week to a greater harmony, to a higher level of perfection. Thus, the Sabbath is the completion or the crowning of the week, when all that was done of a material and spiritual nature during the previous 6 days is summed up and enjoyed. That is to say, it is brought to a higher level of consecration, in order that again, in the following week, there will be another rise in the same cycle of days.
Right. So these are profound words, but maybe to personalize them and to better understand them, I would use the beautiful thought of Rabbi Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, who was one of the great thinkers and rabbis of this past generation. He was known as the founder of the Yeshiva University. Rabbi Yosef Ber Soloveitchik has a great book called The Lonely Man of Faith. He has many other books, but in The Lonely Man of Faith, he speaks of how every single human being is really made of two facets. And this idea is rooted, as he mentions, in the first 2 chapters of Genesis, of the first book of the Torah. Because if you look at the first 2 chapters, it's interesting to note that the story of the creation of Adam appears twice. And every time the wording is different. The first time the creation of, we are told about the creation of Adam in the Torah is in Genesis 1, where we are told that God created a human being, Adam, and he told him and his better half, or his second half, Chava, Eve, Pru urvu umilo et haaretz v'chivshua. Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the world and conquer it. Then in Genesis 2, we are told that God creates Adam, seems to be once again. And this time we are told that Vayipach ba'apav nishmat chaim, that God breathed into Adam's nostrils a living soul. Now, the biblical skeptics love this because they say, you see, there are multiple authors to the Torah. There are multiple Adams. There wasn't just one Adam and Eve, but there were many Adams and many Eves. So how are we to understand this? And Rabbi Soloveitchik comes up with this brilliant idea that speaks about how the creation of Adam 1, as he calls it, and the creation of Adam 2 really speak of the same Adam. The same Adam that has 2 facets. One facet is Adam 1 and one facet is Adam 2. The facet of Adam 1, as it says in Genesis 1, is that facet that Pru urvu milut haaretz v'chivshua. Go and be fruitful, multiply, conquer the earth. It's the human doing, as we would call it. Let's try and conquer the world. Let's try and make an impact. Or as Steve Jobs said, that everyone has to leave a dent in this universe. That's the purpose of every human, to leave a dent. As my rabbi would say that the purpose of life, Rabbi Steinsaltz himself, we're reading his words, the purpose of life is to leave this world better than when you came into it. And everyone has a different pathway to achieve that, but to leave it better than when we came into it. So there's that facet of ours that wants to go and make an impact in this world. But there's also an Adam 2. An Adam 2, that other facet, is really the facet that speaks about the living soul. Vayipach ba'apav nishmat chaim. It's the Adam that wants to retreat and wants to go inwards and wants to connect to the soul, not to the human doing, but to the human being. And every single one of us has those 2 facets. Some people are only Adam 1s and they completely ignore their Adam 2s. And when that happens, it creates a complete imbalance that eventually leads, I believe, to spiritual diseases like depression. Types of depression, not all types, some types of depression are clinical, but some types of depression also very spiritual. Or like other diseases, where the soul will be shouting at you and saying to you, stop ignoring me. I'm a living soul. There's an Adam too in you. Why aren't you giving me any attention? Now, some people are only soulful. All they do is meditate and work on their souls. And when it comes to the impact that they have to leave in the world, they couldn't care less. Let them be on the top of some mountain and divorce themselves from the world their entire lives. But that's also not our calling. The perfect balance in a human being is when a person has figured out how to balance between Adam 1 and Adam 2. Now, we have a formula for this. And this is exactly what Rabbi Steinsaltz is speaking about here. What's the formula? That during the 6 days of the week, from Sunday to Friday, we work and we are out there to be fruitful and multiplying to conquer the world. But once a week, we retreat from that world and we go to Adam 2 and we go to our soul and we say to ourselves, okay, what does my spiritual me want? How can I feed it? How can I indeed ensure that this spiritual me also then guides me when I go back to the 6 days of the week? That I have a spiritual divine compass that guides my every step, even in the 6 days of the week, even when I switch to the human doing, that the human being is there still in control. That's the purpose of Shabbat. And that's how we create this balance that he speaks about here, or this, as he calls it, the greater harmony to a higher level of perfection, a greater harmony that is found not just in the world out there, but also in the world in here. A person that only focuses on the human doing or only focuses on the human being is not a person that will ever find any harmony. And that harmony will come back to haunt him. But person that knows the secret between this in finding this balance between the 6 days of the week and the Shabbat is a person who will then be harmonious without and most importantly within. This is what this really is speaking about. I dare I say that I think that there is no greater gift than the Shabbat. You know, doesn't matter whether you agree with him politically or not, and I'm not the one to speak about politics, nor will I ever speak about politics in public, at least. I mean, it's not my job, but still, nonetheless, you have to point out the good in people when good is created. Joe Lieberman, senator, the previous senator of Connecticut, Joe Lieberman wrote a great book called The Gift of the Sabbath. I would encourage everyone to read it. And The Gift of the Sabbath really speaks about this idea that specifically in our world that is constantly in some type of rat race, whether it's after money or whether it's after fame or whether it's after social media impact or whether constantly out there, the Shabbat is more relevant today than it ever was. And it's true. I really believe that this gift of the Shabbat is a gift that can bring much harmony to our world without and our world within. I don't want to be the only one speaking. I mean, I have some stories that come to mind, but I'd love to hear your perspective on this because that's what study is all about, as we always say. It's a two-way street. So feel free to share your ideas, your disagreements, questions, your comments. Anyone? So I'll share with you the story that came to mind. I don't know if it's a story that whatever, but one of the great Russian writers was Leon Trotsky, who wrote a book called How Much Land Does a Man Need? And in that book, he writes a story about a guy named Pacham, I think it was. Pacham or something like that, who was once given an offer. This was an impoverished man who wanted to be wealthy and own as much land as he could. And one day a wealthy man came to him and said, hey, Pacham, I know you want to own as much land as you can possibly own. So I'm going to make a deal with you. Wake up tomorrow morning very early, and at the crack of dawn, start running and covering as much land as you can with your runs. And by the end of the day, all this land that you will have covered with your runs will belong to you. At sunset, that's it. You can't run anymore. You can continue to run, but whatever you run won't count anymore. But whatever you do between sunrise and sunset, however much land you cover through your runs, you will own. That's my gift to you. So it's a big real estate owner. So Bacham wakes up the next morning and he runs and runs and runs and doesn't waste a second and runs and runs and runs. By the end of the day, he's already exhausted, but he runs and runs and runs. And then he sees the sunset and he knows he has 1 more minute to go, and he runs and runs. And at the very last second, he runs and collapses on the floor while trying to extend to yet another inch of land that he knows he can own. The problem is that he ran so much with such exhaustion that when he collapsed the sunset with his hands stretching out, he also died. And Trotsky concludes the story that at the end of the day, this man only owned a 2x5 piece of land where his casket fit. And it's a story he tells, but it's a story that conveys this message. Sometimes we're running and running and running and running and running. Like the famous Hasidic master, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev, who came out of his house one day and he saw a Jew running and he said, "Where are you running to?" He says, "I'm running to make a living." And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev responded to him, "Well, who says the living is there where you going? Maybe it's behind you and you so immersed in running that you missed it. Maybe you should go back." And it's the same thing. Sometimes we're so immersed in running and being fruitful and conquering the world, that we forget to stop and say, 1 second, where am I going? And really, I mean, I need that extra piece of land. What about this piece of being? Forget this piece of land, this piece of being. And that's the healthy balance between Adam 1 and Adam 2.
So, Rabbi,
yes,
you were talking earlier, about energy. And, if you look at some spiritualities that people, we are all energy. That's really what every living thing is really a mass of energy. And, and we have energy fields around us. And, sometimes you walk into a room and you're immediately attracted to somebody, or you are immediately somebody puts you out. That's because of energy, and so really, I just, I think that in Judaism, as is a leader, but it's so kind of cool to see that other studies of thought, look at energy and how they look at, the human being. And if you think about it, we all have those feelings. Sometimes something repels you about something about someone and you don't know what it is. And that's right. About energy.
Right. No, you're right. And we're all gifted with that soul, right? And I think with going back to Adam 2, the more in tune we are with that soul, the more also we're in tune with its signals.
And it's also, yes, and also there's a part of that that's intuition, that might even be protective, that like if something says to you no and you don't know why. But I think sometimes we need to listen to it maybe more than we have, because it can, I think it's there for a reason.
Right. No, good point. Good point. And look, call it intuition, call it signals of the soul. I think they all relate. Call it gut feeling. Some people go gut feeling. Call it however you want. But I think you're right. I think all these are just like signals of the soul that are calling to you, and we dare not ignore them, because the soul certainly picks up on everything. The soul sees more than what the body sees.
But sometimes, you don't. Sometimes you ignore what the soul is seeing.
Right. And that's a tragedy.
And that's a mistake. Right. But it's like sometimes it's like you see it and you don't want to believe it. So you choose not to. So it's like it's a conscious choice sometimes to ignore it. But Right. Look, Helen Keller, who was blind, as we all know, famously said that when she was once asked, how does it feel to lose your eyesight? She says, to lose my eyesight is one thing, but I know that there's something that's much worse. And that's when you lose your vision. So the soul gives us vision. The body gives us eyesight.
I've got a question.
Yes, please, Vicky.
Why are there so many rules on the Sabbath? you have to walk, you can't drive. I mean, if it's kind of the day of rest, why do I have to walk? Why can't I get in the car? If it's the day of rest, I mean, the whole thing with and I don't know all the rules, being that I was not raised in any environment, but there are a lot of rules during the Sabbath. And to me, that's not restful when I have to follow rules.
Right. So I actually, it's funny you say this, because I just said this to my daughter, who's right now practicing for a play that she's acting in. Annie, right? Is that what it's called? Annie, the famous play. And she was complaining about how the teacher, the instructor is so strict, and she has to wear this costume, and she hates this costume, and she has to act this way and that way. And she was asking basically the same question: why are there so many rules? And the answer, I believe, is very simple. There's so many rules so that the play can be as effective and as beautiful as it can be. So all the rules of Shabbat are there for that rest to be in its ultimate mode, for the soul to be in its ultimate level or mode of expression, or mode of operation. So when we say don't drive, we're not trying to make life difficult. We're just trying to make the soul express itself to the best of its ability. And if we drive, then it's going to distract the expression of the soul. And so it is with all the other rules. It's to really create the ultimate stage for the Shabbat, as that ultimate stage is being created in spite of my daughter's feelings for Annie. But that I really believe, rules are not just there just to be a pain. They're there really to set a stage. Unfortunately, get lost in the stage sometimes.
But isn't it true that a lot of those rules were created before cars? And if you had a horse and you were riding the horse, you needed the horse to rest, and they didn't want people to light fire on Shabbat, and all these were rules that were created, when thousands of years ago. So
right.
There weren't light switches back then. That's what I was going to ask.
Right.
So it's easier to get in a car and drive to the temple than it would be to walk and have to plan your time and rush because you don't get up early enough or whatever. And there's so many differences nowadays.
Right.
And also people were living near each other. You didn't live like I live, driving 15, 20 minutes from shul. I'm not moving, and I just,
No, I understand. So look, we can get into the laws of Shabbat and deviate in that pathway, which is fine. But I will say this: there's the law and there's the spirit of the law. I call the spirit of the law mathematical calculations. It's just like anything else. You can use, and you're an engineer, Vicky, you know this, that you can use many laws of physics in different modes of operation, many different and diverse modes of operation. But the calculations remain the same. I would say God gave us many calculations. I don't think they were created. They were maybe created by God. I think God gave us many different calculations that we then have to imply to the mode of operation that we find ourselves in 2022. Now, it's true that, back then they didn't have cars, they had oxes, but the calculation of how to use your ox is the same calculation as how to use your car. The calculation, the spirit of the law remains the same. God's creation of those rules is the same creation. We just have to be wise enough to know how to apply it to the different situations. And of course, these different situations are being spoken about all the time because the world changes and technology of the world changes so much. But, again, the goal is to maintain the authenticity and the wholesomeness of the calculation and of the spirit behind the law, and then try to apply it in our 2022 lifestyle. That explains it. But I think at the end of the day, there's what's called, so for example, if we want to use Shabbat as an example, that's fine. But for example, on Shabbat, one of the laws is that you are not allowed to, let's see. I mean, for example, someone just asked me this question because it's playoff season. in the NFL, right? And some of the games are on Shabbat. So someone just asked me, am I allowed to put on my TV before Shabbat on that channel that I want to watch, so that when the game comes on, I can watch it and I won't have to press the remote control and violate the Shabbat by doing so? So I told him, you may be allowed to do that, but it goes against the spirit of Shabbat. The whole purpose of Shabbat is to be elevated from this world. Even anyway, the Cardinals suck, so what do you care? But elevate yourself. And if you have your TV, technically it might be allowed. That's fine to put it on before Shabbat. But the spirit of the law is being affected here. So we have to bear that in mind too, right? Anyhow, that's one example. But thank you for that. Any other comments, questions, disagreements?
I just want to say that it's snowing in Jerusalem. It has nothing to do with the class, but it's snowing in Jerusalem as we speak.
Beautiful, good. Okay, good. All right, if there's nothing else, we can continue at the bottom of page 119. Yes.
I've got a question. So
Please, Amy.
he says, in an attempt to raise them spiritually and knowing or unknowingly to bring the weak to a greater harmony, to a higher level of perfection. I'm
Right.
wondering, it's interesting that he says knowingly or unknowingly, but as I'm reading this paragraph, I'm thinking gratitude, but the word gratitude is nowhere in this paragraph.
Right,
But-
gratitude is one way, that's true.
So as I was trying to step into 2022 and set my intentions for 2022, I sort of recapped 2021. And at a suggestion of one of my peers, I wrote a letter to 2021. And
Oh,
it helped me
very-
take inventory of 2021. And as I wrote that letter, it started with the negative. It started with, like, I was disappointed in 2021, or I was sad and with something in 2021. And as I was taking inventory, it very quickly shifted from the negative into the positive.
Mm,
It very quickly, right, because I took the time out to make the space to take inventory, then it shifted into the positive. And then from the positive, it started to shift into where were the holes? Where were
Right.
the things that were maybe missing that I could set intention for 2022? Those were the holes that I wanted to plug.
Yeah.
And I can't help but wonder if Shabbat is a similar, it's just weekly.
it's a beautiful way of putting it. I would agree, yes.
Like we have
Shabbat is
to,
a letter to the week ahead, but there's another letter being written on Shabbat, which is a letter I would encourage you to write too, Amy. If you wrote a letter to 2021, then you should write a letter to 2022 and set your dreams and goals and aspirations for 2022.
well, it started trying to look forward to 2022. And what I'm
Right.
seeing, and I'm seeing with the people around me, people are very sluggish to do that in 2022. It's like they had plans in 2020 and 2021, and they're tired of setting milestones and plans because then everything changes. But I'm just wondering, to me, Shabbat is a time to take time out, and we need that space
Right,
to take inventory.
right. No, very, very well said. So I would say it's both, right? A letter to the week
Yeah.
that you just experienced, but also at the same time, it's a letter to the week ahead.
Well,
And-
isn't that's what he goes on to say, where in order that again, in the following week, there will be another rise in the same cycle of days. It feels like we take time out, we think about the week before, because that's going to prepare us to think about the week ahead.
Right, very
But
good.
maybe I'm reading too much into it. I don't know.
No, that's right. No, that's right. I mean, that's the way I would read it too. Very, very good. Going back to just because you mentioned it also, and it's kind of, it leaves us with this, I don't know, mysterious feeling. But when Rabbi Steinsaltz writes here that in an attempt to raise them spiritually and knowingly or unknowingly to bring
Yeah.
the weak to greater harmony, right? What does he mean? What does that mean? Knowingly or unknowingly? If I don't have the right intention for an act, does it really make a difference? And yet Rabbi Steinsaltz is saying, yes, it does. It does make a difference. If you break off from the week and experience Shabbat, you don't like it. I want to watch that NFL game. I want to watch that playoff game. I'm frustrated right now because I'm not watching it. But unknowingly, your soul is happy. Your soul says, okay, thank you for not bringing me into the craziness of this game. So sometimes we do some things without intention or against our intention, against our, what we think is our desire. But really unknowingly, it's creating joy for the soul. Yes.
I have another comment about that. Sometimes you do something that creates joy perhaps for someone else, and then far beyond that someone else. So like you do a good deed, you think you're affecting one, but you very probably or possibly are affecting multiple people by your one good deed. Either by that person repays it, or your good deed extends beyond the person to whom you gave it.
No, very well said. Yeah, that's right. That could also be part of the unknowingly. It's that ripple effect, as
Yes, yes.
right? Yeah. Well said. Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, anything else? Otherwise, we can continue, but please feel free to speak up.
I'm seeing like sand blowing around. Like, let's say you're on the beach and there's sand blowing, right? And you can't see because there's sand everywhere.
Right, where Hannah is right now. She's on the beach. Yeah.
And then,
okay.
right, if you give it enough time, the dust will settle.
Yeah.
That's the image that I'm seeing here, is that you're allowing the dust to settle so that you can see more clearly.
Oh, very nice.
Or so the turmoil stops.
Right. Good. Excellent. Good. Right. That's what Shabbat is all about. Okay, let's continue. Bottom of page 119. The same insistence on rest. Does anyone want to continue to read?
I can read if you want something.
Thank you.
Right.
Okay, you got it.
Insistence on rest and repudiation of everyday activity is true also for the holidays, even though these feast days do not contain the same profound idea of imitating the divine process of creation in the cycle of 1 week. Still, they are bound up with the cycle of the year, the annual memorials of historic events in the nation's history, which is also a divine history of mankind. Certain allowances are made to ease the sabbatical strictness of the feast days. Nevertheless, the tendency is to go inward. Every holiday has its own particular quality, its own essence and spirituality, so that the way it is celebrated and the whole attitude of the soul toward it is different. The annual cycle goes for Passover, the memorial day for the beginning of life of the soul and for the life of the nation through the feast of Shavuot, the time of overcoming resistance and obstacles, and the commemoration of the receiving of the Torah, which is the standing forth before the Supreme until the feast of Sukkot, which is the time of ripening and maturity and reward. So it goes to the original questions that were asked about the holidays, which is interesting.
Yeah, right, exactly. So what's interesting is that every holiday, right, as we mentioned before, has its own energy, has its own message. If you're writing a letter to the holiday, then you're writing a letter to what it offered to you. There's a Hasidic Jew who I had the privilege of knowing, Rabbi Moshe Weber in Jerusalem, really a holy man. He would say that in every holiday, you have to give something else up for God. You have to go and sacrifice yourself, a part of yourself for God himself. So for example, on Passover, we give up our bread. On Sukkot, where we live in huts for 7 days, we give up our home. On Shavuot, we stay up all night, we give up our sleep. On Purim, where we get drunk, we give up our minds. So every holiday, you give up something. But I'm reminded of this now, especially now as we read this, because indeed, every holiday demands of us something else. Because every holiday is its own energy. And in order to connect to that energy, we have to give up something. Put that aside to be totally immersed in that energy. And so it's different than Shabbat, because I would say Shabbat speaks to our very essence, to our being, right? Not to our doing, but to our soul, not to our body. So it's different, a little bit different than Shabbat, but it's still the same, because Shabbat, again, offers us rejuvenation. And holidays also offer us different gifts. So the holiday of Passover offers us the gift of freedom. And, whatever it is. On Sukkot, it offers us the gift of being in God's embrace, feeling God's embrace, which is what the Sukkah is all about. And every Hanukkah that was mentioned before offers us the gift of being lights and knowing how to illuminate, reminding ourselves of the atas, to illuminate the darkness of the world, which is what the Chanukiah does, the menorah does. So every holiday is its own message, right? But again, in order to become in tune with that message, sometimes you have to give up a little bit of yourself. So on Shabbat, we have to give up a human doing in order to be the human being. On other holidays, we give up something else in order to connect to the message of the holiday. So what this is saying here. So it's different for every holiday, but the act of going inwards and connecting to an energy that's greater than us with the energy within is the same.
Rabbi, this
Yeah.
is, I'm not sure if anybody else is seeing it, but you're talking about energy, you're talking about all of this, and you have rays of light coming in with a rainbow going right across the screen. And it's
Okay.
absolutely fascinating. I'm not sure what's producing it, but you're talking about all this energy, and literally these rays of lights are coming down, and this rainbow is literally straight across. Does anybody else see that?
Yeah, I see it, Vicky. I do. Yeah.
It's the first time I've ever seen it. So you must
Yeah.
be really putting
All
out
right.
a lot of energy.
I don't know about that.
Very cool,
I'm
very cool.
embarrassed. Okay, maybe I should just move my camera. Okay.
Thought it was Rabbi Steinsaltz.
All right, fine.
And then I thought it was God, and then I was
Yeah,
like,
all
all
of
right, same.
Okay, you all have beautiful look. You all have rooms that are illuminating, so it's not just me. Okay.
You're the
But-
one with the rainbow, sorry.
Oh, please. I don't even know what's producing it. Okay.
I think that the key to what we've been talking about is that what this does by doing these things on the different holidays or celebrating the way we should, we're freeing ourselves up to be able to look at ourselves differently and think differently. And it's a very freeing kind of feeling.
Yeah, it's true. It's well said, and in a way, it's liberating because we're liberating a part of us. We're liberating, like I said, the soul that sometimes is ignored in the 6 days of the week. We don't have much time to it. I once asked Rabbi Steinsaltz, going back to Rabbi Steinsaltz, I once asked him, we pray every day, and then on Shabbat is yet a different prayer. What's the difference between the prayer of Shabbat and the prayer of the weekdays? And he said that the prayer of the weekdays and the prayer of Shabbat in essence are the same, but on Shabbat, we actually have a long meeting with God, a conference with God. It's an immersion. During the weekdays, because of the busyness of the week, it's just a text message to God. Hey, hello, we're here. I hope you're with us. It's touching base with God, but it's not that full immersion.